A very good morning to you, distinguished guests and panelists. I hope everyone can hear me loud and clear. Yeah. I would like to warmly welcome you to the pre-27th Nigerian Economic Summit virtual session with the title MSME Funding, Insights, Impact, Accountability. Thank you for logging in and for logging in on time. My name is Amaka Wokolo. I lead the research and policy advocacy work at Faith Foundation, and I am a co-facilitator on the NESG MSME Community of Practice. Faith Foundation is Nigeria's foremost nonprofit, founded in 2000 by Mr. Fola Adiola, co-founder GT Bank, to provide entrepreneurship knowledge and enterprise support to enable Nigerian businesses start, grow, and scale sustainably. The NESG MSME Community of Practice is one of several policy commissions at the NESG. The community works with entrepreneurship ecosystem players in Nigeria to address key gaps around capacity building and business support, access to markets, policy and regulations, and access to finance. Before I proceed, a few housekeeping rules, which is really just a gentle reminder, bearing in mind that we are familiar with some of these rules by now. Please keep your microphones on mute for us to have a seamless conversation. If you have any questions during the panel discussion, kindly type them in the Zoom box or via YouTube. We have a team coordinating behind the scenes who will ensure that I bring up your questions during the Q&A session after the panel discussion. This event is one of many pre-summit conversations that would envision strategies to reverse Nigeria's poor economic trends to achieve high and sustained growth and bring Nigeria back on its path to assuming its economic potential. The 27th Nigerian Economic Summit, with the theme Securing Our Future, the fierce urgency of now, is scheduled to hold on the 25th and 26th of October, 2021. Please plan to attend and save the date if you haven't. You can also pre-register via the link that my colleagues will share during the course of this program. Now, to formally kickstart the meeting, I will now welcome Mrs. Adenike Adeyemi, who is the Executive Director at Faith Foundation and is the facilitator for the NESG Community of Practice to give the opening remarks. You have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Amaka. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It is my delight and pleasure to welcome you all to today's pre-summit conversations focusing on MSME funding in Nigeria, insights, impacts, and accountability. We're very delighted to have with us our special guest speakers and panelists who really will be providing the perspectives, the insights, and even responding to a lot of our inquiries regarding the financing challenge for Nigeria's micro, small, and medium enterprises. As Amaka has said, the MSME Community of Practice is one of the groups within the Nigerian Economic Summit Group with the special focus on enabling Nigeria's vast micro, small, and medium enterprises. What the MSME Community of Practice does is brings in stakeholders across private, public, and also across the development states, across Nigeria, if I should emphasize, who deliberate, who share their insights and findings around key policies that are relevant and that are essential to enable Nigeria's micro, small, and medium enterprises. We have 4 thematic groups. The first one is the Access to Finance Group, which is led by Mr. Akintunde Maberu, the CEO of Abusi Ventures. The second focuses on capacity building, and that is led by Mrs. Hansen Edugom, who is the Managing Director of Wider Perspectives. The third thematic group is focused on access to market, and that is led by Mr. Dennis Onwegu. And the fourth is focused on regulations and business support, and that is led by Dr. Femi Akinbola, who is a senior lecturer at FUNAB. Across all these thematic groups, we focus on having conversations, deliberate conversations, insights, and perspectives around ongoing policy programs and initiatives that are being implemented or are planned to be implemented at the federal and at the state and local levels, and then engage on what works, what can be improved, and also learnings that can be scaled up. And it is from those type of conversations that we're even having a pre-summit conversation that we're having. I want to assure us that this summit conversation will feed into the larger Nigerian Economic Summit conversation that's happening in October. And as I round up, I would like to formally welcome our special guests, namely Dr. Diko Umaru Rada, the Director General of the Small and Medium Enterprises Agency of Nigeria, SMEDAN, Mr. Olukayode Piton, the Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of the Bank of Industry, Mr. Abubakar Abdullahi Kure, the Managing Director of Nersel Microfinance Bank, Mrs. Teju Abisoye, the Executive Secretary of the Lagos State Employment Trust Fund, and Mrs. Ayodele Olojede, who is the Group Head of Emerging Businesses at Access Bank. We can see that we've put together a lineup of speakers across the government, across the private sector, and also even in between to provide perspectives around the key MSME funds in Nigeria. So thank you very much, sirs and ma'ams, particularly given the short notice, we appreciate your confirmation. And last but not the least, I would like to welcome and invite Mrs. Wonuola Adetayo, who is the co-founder and executive director of Kainos Edge Consulting Limited, and also a director on the board of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, to give the welcome address. You're welcome, ma'am.
Thank you very much. And thank you for setting a beautiful background for us to start today. Thank you also for welcoming each of the speakers by name, so that you have saved me all of that trouble. Thank you so very much. So distinguished heads of ministries, departments and agencies, captains of industries, heads of associations, donor communities, our speakers and panelists, and members of the press. I am most delighted to welcome you to this pre-summit event of the 27th Nigeria Economic Summit, which is jointly organized by the Nigeria Economic Summit Group and the Federal Ministry of Finance, Budget, and National Planning. The challenge of access to funding has consistently been touted as one of the major issues confronting Nigeria's entrepreneurship ecosystem. Indeed, according to PricewaterhouseCoopers 2020 Micro, Small, and Medium Enterprises Survey, obtaining finance has been identified as the most pressing challenge that is faced by micro, small, and medium enterprises. PwC actually estimates that the financing gap for Nigeria MSMEs is about 617.3 billion annually. And this was prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. So you can imagine what they must be facing at this very moment. Unfortunately, it's so painful to note that whilst the MSMEs contribute almost 50% to Nigeria's GDP, only 0.3% of total commercial banking credit was accessed by small businesses. I mean, contrast 50% contribution to 0.3% of the funding that was available. So they got only 0.3%. And this is recorded in the 2018 Statistical Bulletin of the Central Bank of Nigeria. Furthermore, less than 5% of SMEs have been able to access adequate finance for their working capital and indeed for funding business growth and expansion. And you can check this out in the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics report. Sadly, this pre-existing challenge has been exacerbated by the impact of COVID-19 because many businesses prior to that time and even right now are still in need of funds, even whilst on the path of recovery. This unfortunate situation has been confirmed by Faith Foundation's report on the impact of COVID-19 on Nigeria MSMEs, which indicated that over 50% of businesses surveyed reported that their funding and cash flow were impacted negatively by the COVID-19 pandemic. The NESG MSME community of practice has been working with the entrepreneurship ecosystem players in Nigeria to address the key gaps within the ecosystem, such as capacity building and business support, also access to market, policy and regulations, and access to finance. In particular, access to finance was adopted as one of the core focus areas for the community of practice in view of the critical role that it plays in enabling business growth. Passionate conversations have so far been held, and it has been held on a continuous basis by the community of practice. And they've been doing this on the challenge of access to finance, particularly touching on the current funding programs with the goal of developing recommendations that can be shared with policymakers during engagement sessions. Towards this end, the focus of the conversation at today's pre-summit event will be on MSME funding in Nigeria, insights, impact, and accountability. The purpose is to build on the ongoing conversations and also to better understand the funding situation. The conversations will specifically examine funding MSME programs in Nigeria to draw insights, to track impacts, to identify strengths and gaps, and obviously to expose improvement opportunity areas. At the end of today's public-private dialogue, we expect to have developed key agreements that will drive the advocacy effort of the MSME community of practice. As you probably are aware, and which I'm very glad, Nike mentioned that, okay, the theme of the 27th Nigeria Economic Summit is securing our future, the first urgency of now. So the pre-summit events have been designed to identify urgent matters to be addressed so that we can showcase them to the policymakers at the summit, which holds next month in October. Today's pre-summit event is to identify urgent recommendations, in particular, that will ensure accountability with funding programs going forward. This is particularly important as MSMEs are crucial to the stabilization of the Nigerian economy, which, like other economies all over the world, has had to grapple with the negative impact of COVID-19. It is our fervent belief that with sustained efforts from the private sector and active collaboration with the Nigeria's MSME ecosystem, we will be able to draw the required investments that will make the MSME industry a major contributor to Nigeria's economic development in the national interest. As I wish us happy deliberations this morning, on behalf of the NESG, it is our hope that we will evolve a more trend-setting and collaborative development of the Nigerian economy. May God bless our dear country, Nigeria. Thank you very much and welcome once again.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mrs. Adetayo, for that passionate welcome address. Thank you. Moving on quickly to the next item on the agenda, we will be taking a presentation that will provide a high-level overview of the funding situation in Nigeria and would also set the tone, provide some context for the panel conversations that will be coming up shortly. Taking this presentation will be Mr. Akintunde Maberu, who is the MD CEO, Abusi Ventures, and the thematic lead Access to Finance Group within the MSME community of practice. Over to you, Mr. Maberu.
Yeah, good morning, Amaka.
Good morning.
I'm glad to be here and also glad to set the tone for today's event with the theme MSME funding in Nigeria, insights, impacts, and of course, accountability. I'd like to give a brief background and recap on what has earlier been mentioned. The access to funding has consistently been touted as one of the major challenges pervading Nigerians' entrepreneurship ecosystem. Just like you have heard, according to PricewaterhouseCoopers 2020 MSME survey, obtaining finance is the most pressing challenge that micro, small, and medium enterprises face. PricewaterhouseCoopers also estimates that the financing gap for the Nigerian MSME is about 617.3 billion annually. 617.3 billion annually. That is pre-COVID, before the start of the pandemic. Also, according to this 2018 statistical bulletin by the Central Bank of Nigeria, it also states that only 3% of the total commercial banking credits was availed to small businesses. We all know that the small businesses are the bedrock of economic growth globally. It is a global acknowledgement that this subsector provides the most jobs, contributes the most to the gross domestic product of any country. Also, less than 5% of SMEs have been able to access adequate finance for working capital and for funding business growth stroke expansion, according to the National Bureau of Statistics, NBS. And yet, MSME contribute almost 50% to the Nigerian GDP. It's not only in Nigeria that this contribution to GDP is as high as this. In other jurisdictions, we also have contributions from MSME on a higher scale, even more than Nigeria. In developed economy, we have this even on a higher pedestal. Sadly, this pre-existing challenge has been exacerbated by the impacts of COVID-19. The pandemic brought quite a number of challenges to businesses in Nigeria, as many businesses were and still in need of funds, while on the path of recovery. According to Faith Foundation, impact of COVID-19 on Nigerians MSMEs reports, over 50% of businesses surveyed reported that their funding and cash flow were impacted negatively by the COVID-19 pandemic. We also know that funding for the MSME has a lot of constraints and risk, which makes traditional financing approach with its attendant high interest rates unworkable in the country. Although traditional approach succeeds in other climes, it has failed in many developing countries, including Nigeria. A lot of deposit money banks avoid giving loan to the subsector. They claim that there are a lot of paperwork that is involved. There are a lot of energy that is dissipated. That in fact, extension of funding to other major corporations take less strength to deal with than funding MSME. That is the claim of the regular banks. We know, just like we have said, that MSME creates the most jobs. And because of this, government around the world provide one support or the other to improve their laws, thereby ensuring economic growth. The World Bank estimates that 600 jobs will be needed by 2030, and the International Finance Corporation also estimates that 65 million firms, or 40% of MSME in developing countries, have unmet financing needs of 5.2 trillion every year. In Nigeria, over 40 million MSME employs 80% of the total workforce and contributes about 49% to the country's gross domestic products. The promptness of the funding initiative introduced within the time frame, the loans and funding facilities have been beneficial to MSME that have been able to access them, leading to multiplicity of benefits. But before then, we have to look at the fact that the current administration has supported the sector to some degrees. There has been direct intervention through state-owned financial institutions, such as the BOI, that's the Bank of Industry, the NASA Microfinance Bank, that's NMFB. We have the Development Bank of Nigeria, DBN, the Bank of Agriculture. They have been able to support the subsector to the tune of 324 billion as at the end of 2020. But there are gaps. There are major gaps in funding MSME. We note that the current loan requests of one of the intervention funds, the AGMIS loans, applicants is in the range of over 43,000. And the loan request is about 430 billion. Ladies and gentlemen, the estimated funding gap for the MSME is about 2.1 trillion as we speak. Of course, just like I've said earlier on, the Nigerian government of the President Buhari administration has taken steps to address the funding gap within the entrepreneurship ecosystem by introducing some funding programs, such as the Micro, Small, and Medium Enterprises Development Fund, MSMEDF. We also have the Agricultural Credit Guarantee Scheme Fund, SCGS. And of course, we have NASA PLC that supports borrowing specifically for agric program. We have Anchor Borrowers Program being anchored by NASA PLC. We also have the Agribusiness Small and Medium Enterprises Investment Scheme, which is aptly called AXMIS loan, which is being managed by NASA Microfinance Bank for AGMIS loan applicants. And so the pandemic came, and when it came, it impacted a lot on business space, particularly the micro, small, and medium. And because of the impact, in order to reduce the impact of COVID-19 on the subsector, 50 billion was initially set aside. And it was called Targeted Credit Facility for Household and Businesses. And this was later increased by an additional 50 billion in March 2021. There are also another 100 billion healthcare support intervention facility for the healthcare sector. There is also a fund for the creative industry, which is called Creative Industry Financing Initiative. At the CBN, last year, November, at the bankers' dinner, also gave an update of this intervention fund. It stated that the targeted fund has had 149.6 billion already disbursed to 316,869 beneficiaries. The CBN also went ahead to inform the House then in November that Agmi's loan has gone out to the tune of 93 billion to a total number of 24,702 beneficiaries. We've heard about all this as given by the CBN, with so much funding being invested into the entrepreneurship ecosystem, and with little or no significant impact being witnessed on the access to funding gap. The question of accountability then arises. Ladies and gentlemen, we are also aware that recently there were decline messages that were received by Agmi's loan applicants who had applied for Agmi's loan and they had been interviewed since September last year, but they were waiting for disbursement. Some few months ago, they were given a shock, which was very destabilizing.
Hello, Mr. Maberu, are you still with us? Can everyone hear me loud and clear?
We can
Amaka, we can hear
Yes.
you. Very clearly.
Okay.
Amaka, we can hear you. Yes.
Excellent. I just wanted to be sure it wasn't my internet. Okay, so I think that Mr. Maberu was wrapping up his presentation, and based on what he has shared so far, we have good information and some context to commence the panel conversations that are ensuing now. Before we do that, I will just quickly introduce the panel speakers that we have, and I will start with my first panel speaker, Dr. Diko Umaru Rada. Dr. Rada is the Director General and Chief Executive Officer at the Small and Medium Enterprises Development Agency of Nigeria, SMEDA. Dr. Rada is an astute politician, entrepreneur, teacher, and banker with wide administrative experience and a PhD from ABU Zaria. You're very welcome, sir. Thank you for joining this conversation today.
Thank you very much.
My next speaker is Mr. Olukayode Piton, who is the MD and CEO at the Bank of Industry, BOI, Nigeria's oldest and largest development finance institution. He's a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Bankers of Nigeria, fellow of the Chartered Institute of Stockbrokers, and a fellow at the Institute of Credit Administration of Nigeria. Mr. Piton draws on significant work experience gained in both the corporate and banking sector during the course of his over 30-year career. Today, Mr. Piton will be represented by Mr. Obaru Osa, Divisional Head SME at BOI. You're very welcome, Mr. Obaru Osa.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here. Thank you very much.
Good to have you.
Thank you.
My next speaker is Ms. Teju Abisoye, who is a lawyer with extensive experience in development finance, project planning, execution, monitoring and evaluation of humanitarian projects, government interventions, and investment opportunities. Prior to joining the Lagos State Employment Trust Fund, LSCTF, where she acts as the acting executive secretary, she served as director, post-award support of UWIN, where she was responsible for managing consultants nationwide to provide training, monitoring, and evaluation for a minimum of 1,200 awardees annually. She has also managed the affairs of a non-government organization based in Lagos State, Nigeria. You are very welcome to the conversation, ma'am.
Good morning. It's good to be here.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us. My next speaker is Mr. Abubakar Abdullahi Kure, who heads Nesal Microfinance Bank. Mr. Kure is a seasoned banker with over 29 years experience working in the Apex Bank in Nigeria, with deep experience in front office banking operations and customer relations. His strong project management skills were evident when he successfully delivered the Treasury single account for the federal government across ministries, departments, and agencies nationwide. He's a graduate of ABU Zaria, where he obtained a degree in business administration and an MBA. He's a member of the Nigerian Institute of Management, the Nigerian Institute of Secretaries. He has also attended several banking and management courses all over the world. Mr. Kure's contribution to the MSME sector and outstanding performance supporting SMEs, particularly the youth, during the pandemic has been widely lauded by several associations and corporate entities. Mr. Kure, thank you very much for joining us this morning, sir.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
My final panelist today is Mrs. Ayo Olojede, who is the group head, emerging businesses at Access Bank, where she is responsible for the strategy formulation to deliver the bottom line factor of the division. With over 20 years operational banking experience in Africa and North America, Mrs. Olojede works to ensure the sustainable growth of MSMEs by applying her wealth of knowledge and hands-on experience of best practices in SME banking, value propositions, and risk management approaches to expand financial access to SMEs and women-led businesses. Her work has achieved significant recognition for best-class SME-specific credit assessment methodology, both locally and internationally, to expand lending to new-to-borrowing SMEs. She's a member of the bank's Digital Council, which has overall responsibility for the bank's digital strategy, approved partnership with fintech companies, and monitoring the implementation of digital initiatives. She is a university scholar, a fellow at Chartered Accountant, and holds an MBA degree from Kellogg School of Management, Eversted. She speaks globally on SME finance and business services. Mrs. Olojede, thank you very much for joining us. You're highly welcome to the conversation this morning.
Thank you very much, Maka. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's good to see you. So we're just going to go straight into the panel conversations. We have heard a lot today about some of the challenges, some of the steps that have been taken to try to mitigate the access to funding challenge within the Nigerian entrepreneurship ecosystem. There have been a lot of programs that have been introduced by the government and even commensurate efforts coming from the private sector as well. But for some reason, it appears that the access to finance challenge, we're not even scratching the surface of what the problem is. And so many questions come to mind. So for example, do we have a structure in place to tackle this issue? Do we measure impact? How do we measure impact? Have there been instances where we're able to deploy or implement a funding program and it was successful? If it was successful, what can we learn? Can we replicate that? What are accountability measures? A whole host of questions. And so we're just going to jump right in and start and try to figure out if we can find answers to some of these questions that seem to evoke even further questions. And so starting off, I will direct my first question to Dr. Rada. And so Dr. Rada, as the head of the public institution overseeing MSME activities in Nigeria, and with the amount of funds that have been invested into the entrepreneurship ecosystem, what would you say has been the impact of MSME funds over the years, particularly in the last 2 to 3 years?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me. And first of all, I would like to say good morning to all my colleagues, the head of the parastatals boards in state and federal government, and the members or leaders of the private organizations that are here, the organizers, Nigerian Economic Summit Group. Welcome to, and I'm very happy that I'm joining you today to discuss on this very important problem that is having a very positive or negative impact on the economy of our country. I would like to say that MSMEs are really very critical to the national economic growth and development. Apart from the skills capacity building or access to national, regional, and local markets, I think access to finance is one of the critical resources for growth and survival of MSME in our country. And I do agree with you that you have mentioned earlier that a lot of funds have been invested in the MSME ecosystem, and both at the public institution overseeing the activities of MSME in our country. It is really a Herculean task on us to track all the invested funds in the MSME space and also the beneficiaries of these funds. Because there is no any coordinated activity towards tracking these funds and as well as providing knowing the actual beneficiaries of these funds. The agency is not privy to the amount of funds invested and the sector involved. And I think critical criteria for disbursement on the beneficiaries involved also, we are not privy to it. But from the interaction with the MSMEs, operators, and from the survey that we usually conduct between Msme and the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, access to finance has been a very, very critical thing, and it is very limited. Not that there are no amount of funds available in the ecosystem, but sometimes assessing those funds are limited by the MSMEs. Largely, I think due to the maybe the requirement outlined for the MSMEs, maybe the procedures of assessing the loan, and then maybe the amount of MSMEs that are at macro level in our country, because more than 98% of the MSMEs are at the macro level of the MSME development. And I think at that level, their level of education, their level of awareness is very limited. So I think that has generated to the limited access to MSME finance, even though there are a lot of funds available. So the desired impact that we are looking for the MSME development through these funds that are in the ecosystem, I think has not been very positive. But by the way, we cannot also say that the funds have not really impacted to some few MSMEs that are able to access it in terms of creation of jobs and also improving their livelihood. But I think the desired impact has not been very positive from the interactions that we usually have with the operators in the MSME space. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Rada. So I hear you say there are challenges on both parts. So for the MSMEs being able to access the funds, they have a role to play. And then from your own end, as the public institution overseeing MSMEs in Nigeria, there are challenges with regards to coordination, being able to, for the entire public sector to be coordinated to track funds that are being disbursed. So I want to dwell on that a bit. How do you think that challenge can be mitigated, particularly because we have a number of public sector officials on this call? How do we begin to mitigate that challenge? Because I really think that if there's a lack of coordination at that level, it will be difficult to even make any headway. So, as the head of this institution, what are your suggestions?
I think something has we have started to develop something to track all those things. I think the first thing is that you are aware we have the national MSME policy, and under that MSME policy is to ensure sustainable emergence of new enterprises to support scaling of a new enterprise and then scaling up of the existing enterprises. For that, I think we have already inaugurated the National Council of MSME. And in the National Council of MSME, which is headed by the Vice President of this country, it has all the stakeholders. That is all those people who are responsible for anything to do with MSME, including public and private sector. They are all in the council, which is chaired by the Vice President. And we have the replica of that council in all the states of the Federation, which is being headed by the deputy governors in all those states, and all the stakeholders are involved. And I think the council have not been very active these days, but I think we are trying to make sure that, because the council is supposed to meet every quarter, and we are supposed to review all the activities of the stakeholders at that meeting, and then it should be coordinated at that level, Madam being the secretariat of the MSME Council. I think when we put more effort in making the council to be more active, we'll have more better coordinated activities of MSME in the ecosystem. And we are working on that to ensure that we are meeting every quarter. I think the last time we met is the last quarter of last year. And because of a lot of activities in the office of the Vice President, we are unable to get another date to meet. But I think if we can revive meeting regularly at the MSME Council, we can be able to coordinate the activities, to be able to track the beneficiaries of those funds, and also to be able to know who get what and at what level. So I think it's very important, and we should hold, I think it is better now that we hold all the stakeholders in the council responsible for bringing up to date on the activities of the access to funding in the MSME spend and other activities that has to do with the MSME development.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Rada. You make an excellent point around holding members or representatives on the National Council accountable. I'll come back to you because it'd be great to hear recommendations on how we can do that. How do we engage with these representatives? How do we hold them accountable? But you made a point around the funding programs that have been deployed and the impact it has made. It may not be so much, but it has made some impact. And I think that building on that, it's clear to see that there are examples of funding programs in Nigeria that have been successful. And so the question is, how do we learn from such examples? And that brings me to my next question, which I will direct at Mr. Obaru of BOI. So Mr. Obaru, you are up next. BOI, I know, provides financial support to push industrialization through infrastructure and mechanization support. Now, can you share a case study of a funding program that has created desired impact using key indicators and numbers to buttress this point? What's an example, a case study example that you can share of a funding program that has created the desired impact?
Okay, thank you very much, Amaka. Let me start by formally apologizing to this unique audience of the inability of my MD, Mr. Olukaide Quiton, to be present in person. He thought he can make it, but you know, official calls at times, it was not just impossible for him to leave what he's doing now. So he asked me to represent him, so I need to apologize. Now, specific to your questions, we are aware that the MSMEs are the bedrock of any economic growth. and that has been tested over the years. What have we done as a bank, as a little contribution to address the challenge? The example I want to give is the Northeast Rehabilitation Fund. Because of the Boko Haram challenges in Northeast, which has been on for over a decade now, the bank thought it wise in 2017 to launch a fund called Northeast Rehabilitation Fund. The essence is to provide support to our brothers and sisters in that region of the country who have suffered from the ravages of war and suffered so much challenges, So what the bank did in 2017 was to launch a fund to the value of 2.4 billion, 100% funded by the bank, to provide support to the Northeast, interest-free and no administrative fees. The tenor for under that arrangement is about 6 months, and obligor limit is 10 million naira. The essence is to rejuvenate economic activities in the region after the several years of adverse impact of the Boko Haram phenomenon and insurgency and terrorism in that part of the country. So far, we have disbursed about 570 million naira, under that fund to almost 60,000 beneficiaries in the Northeast, just to bring back life to that part of the country. This is a specific example of what the bank has done to intervene in a particular region of the country with the objective of bringing life back to the MSME space in that part of Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Obaru. I think that's an excellent example. But just to delve a bit deeper, in terms of impact, right? This money was disbursed. We have about 60,000 beneficiaries who have been able to access this fund. In terms of impact, what can you say to that? Are businesses thriving, at least for the 60,000 beneficiaries? Are those businesses thriving? Were they able to create jobs? Because ultimately, when we're investing these funds, what we want to see is job creation, wealth creation. So from that perspective, would you say we are seeing impact and say we've seen results around that?
Of course, we've for the first time, we actually left our traditional area to support trading, support services, because when there's nothing is happening in that Northeast, we needed to bring back that support to them. So they embraced it. People have started doing trading businesses. People who are into trading of cement, etc., they started the business. Those selling fish has gone back to the business. Those set of bakeries, eateries have gone back. So as stability returns, they need the funding to go back to ensure that they do the business. So if you look at it in terms of impact, we realize that with the support we are giving to them, people are now moving back to those environments which ordinarily they would have run away, maybe run to Abuja or run to Jos to have a new way. But because the BOI is there and we have offices in those locations, we have an office in Bauchi, and the office open 24/7, Right. So with that, people have come back to say there's a support coming from an institution of government and it's offered at interest-free, and then the obligor limits are 10 million. The bulk of the 41 million MSMEs, what they need is less than 10 million to provide funding to run their businesses. So now you have it coming from a bank at 0 interest rate, and you can draw up to 10 billion naira to do any economic activity. So we're not focusing strictly on value added, which is our core mandate. This rehabilitation fund also provides support for those in trading, those involved in services, buying and selling, in addition to manufacturing. So that has brought some stability and instilled more confidence in our brothers and sisters who are in that part of the country to actually go back to their homes and also think of starting their lives again. So I think it's very effective, and we're grateful that we're able to do that since 2017.
Thank you, Mr. Osa. So I am going to ask questions around impact a bit more when I come back to you, but just to quickly throw this out there. So in terms of impact, the impact you have just so beautifully described, do we have numbers, from the BOI showing jobs that have been created because of these funds that have been invested in that region? Do we have that? Yes, we do. Okay.
The way we can give estimates. We can estimate based on the value and the beneficiaries.
Okay.
So we can estimate, because for every 1 billion investment, we are looking at about 4 million people who would have benefited from that impact. So if we invested almost 600 million, I can do that estimate of how many benefit, because benefited about 60,000. So for every beneficiary that you support, you have 4 indirect beneficiaries. So if you multiply that by 4, that tells you the impact of what you made in terms of people in that neighborhood. Because for every man that you create a job for, he has a dependent, he has children, he has brothers that support that work with him. So on average, about 4. For every direct job you create, it makes impact of 4 people. So every direct one job, it makes impact of 4 indirect jobs. So with that, you can estimate it by multiplying that number by 4. That tells you the magnitude of what we've done in that neighborhood. This is in addition to our traditional supporting scheme, because what we've done, this fund is special. Apart from this, we have an office in Bauchi who traditionally also provides support to industries and medicine in that space using our core requirements in line with the BOI mandate. But this is an additional support. And so the numbers are given are strictly for that unique support of interest-free, up legal of 10 billion naira, and you can do any business, any economic activity can be done drawing from this Northeast Rehabilitation Fund.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Osa. So building on the conversation around programs that have been effective, I am now going to move over to LSCTF, Ms. Abisoye. And so my question to you is this. LSCTF has over the years built a reputation for easing access to funding while also ensuring the organization is accountable to stakeholders. Looking back over the past 5 years, what measures would you say LSCTF puts in place to provide details that ensure transparency and accountability of funds raised and disbursed?
Thank you very much, Amaka. Again, I've listened to co-panelists talk about interventions and structures to actually improve access to finance. I think I just want to quickly throw this in, Amaka, before I go straight to your question, is that I think we're making progress. And one of the things I want to mention is this national identity number, which has been used across the world. Because when you have a number, social security number, NI number, whatever we call it, that can help us trace. So all the issues people are complaining around documentation, I don't have a guarantor, we can reasonably assume that unless the person literally is dead, if you grant them credit, they would either repay or never be able to access credit again. So I think we are going to get traction once we can tie this to individuals across the world. And because again, every survey we do, the majority, the more recent one is access to funding that they say is the issue. So 83% of our recent survey is still access to funding. But it's not like there's no funding to support people. I'm happy Ayodele is here from Access Bank. In partnership, we have over 10 billion available to fund MSMEs. But again, issues around documentation, around guarantors, some people don't, because again, we're taxpayers' money, we always ask for LIRS IDs, company accounts. So that's part of our own accountability transparency structure. How do we create the right partnerships to make sure that we are accountable to not just the government, but also to the private sector? So that's why we think partnerships with commercial banks are extremely important as a government institution. It helps improve transparency and accountability. Secondly, again, we will work with independent impact evaluation partners. Our first evaluation partner, impact evaluation we did was in 2018. And this was conducted by SAGE and paid for by Ford Foundation. So we didn't want to pay for it so that the person doesn't feel they have any reason to oblige LSCTF. And the impact at that time, we had supported 7,000 small businesses with access to finance. And based on that, they had created, by that impact evaluation, over 100,000 jobs, based on figures and the different sectors that we were supporting. So these are different structures that we continue to use. Currently, another impact evaluation is going on now, being paid for and carried out by JPAL. This is an institute out of MIT in the US. We're doing all of this to help improve transparency, to know where we need to tweak. What are the issues? Where are the areas that we need to focus or pay attention to? Because when we look at the application numbers, for example, we've received over 100,000 applications. We've only been able to support about 16%. Yes, a number of that has also gone. We also have those challenges where that is not 100% performance. But again, those are the things, areas where I think we should begin to focus on how do we create that. Credit bureaus, yes, are very relevant. They're useful right now. But we have to make sure that the whole community around MSME or funding is able to say when somebody has a defaulting loan, we're not going to grant another one. That way, anybody can grant loan, knowing that in actual fact, once this person defaults, they don't have access to credit again. Maybe we'll create more responsibility on the path of the MSMEs to also be paying attention to making sure that they're character-wise, they're paying down their facilities. But that's LSCTF in a nutshell. It's important partnerships, collaborations, areas where that can improve transparency and accountability, and making sure that we're actually measuring impact and paying attention to the market. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Miss Abisoye. I apologize. So as you were speaking, I thought it was just really interesting to hear you talk about collaboration and talk about partnerships and how this has really helped LSCTF to achieve some of its goals. My question is then, can this be replicated across board? In Nigeria, this is a typical example of something that is working, right? Can it be replicated in other states? And from your own perspective, I know you can't speak to what is happening in other states, but but why do you think this isn't happening? Because as you were speaking, I was just trying to imagine this is happening in Lagos, it's happening in Port Harcourt, it's happening in Abuja, in Ogun State. And I can just imagine the impact it will have on the economy, it will have on the overall unemployment rate, Okay. So I know this is a tough question.
But I would speak to it because again, so one of the things, to be fair to a lot of the other states, they had come to us to say, look, how are you doing this? Can we learn? What is the structures we have to put in place? And we were very happy to support any state with that, with the learning exchange. Yes. So we started the employment summit, which we hosted in 2020, and we're hosting another one next year, which is to describe our structures and to make sure that people can learn from it. Now, what I would say is that one thing LSCTF will continue to do first is making sure that there's corporate governance. So we're very insulated from politics, and as much as possible, we make sure that we can just deliver our mandate. So you will see us when we did the MSME Recovery Fund post the NSAS issues that happened last year. We raised over $1 billion with support of Access Bank, other partners as well. But we presented the reports to the public as well. This is very critical when it comes to governments and states, because if you're not willing to do that, you will not, I don't see sustainability without that accountability. We have to be able to agree that whatever you're setting up or whatever structure or agency you want to support MSME, whether it's SMEDAN on the national level, there must be accountability, there must be collaboration, there must be very distinct. We publish our audited accounts every year. Public knowledge, because it's important that you do this as a government agency and you continue to make sure that this becomes critical. So we will continue to share the structures we're using with any state government that is interested. We're happy to work with people, we're happy to work with states, even NGOs, philanthropists that want to do this across Nigeria. Because again, we find it's a structure that is working and can work in any location in Nigeria. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Abisoye. Thank you. So my next question, I'm going to move over to Mr. Kure. So when we listened to Mrs. Adetayo and Mr. Maberu speak, when we listened to them, both delegates speak, there was a lot of conversation around funding from the government, disbursement, and all of that. I'm so happy that you're on the call today, sir. And so my first question to you, which is probably an obvious one, would be to say, looking at funding programs being implemented by National Microfinance Bank, how much would you say has been disbursed to date? You're on mute, Mr. Kure. Mr. Kure, we can't hear you. You're on mute, sir.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Amaka, another panelist here. National Microfinance Bank has done a lot around disbursement, which of course have brought Nigerian economy out of recession because an affordable loan. In specifics, we have done over 500 billion loans on SME, and the composition is as follows. The target credit facility, which is otherwise called COVID, we have done over 350 billion, over 670,000 beneficiaries. For the agris, which of course is referred to as Agribusiness Small and Medium Enterprise Investment Scheme, we have done 105 billion to 28,000 beneficiaries. On the aqua borrowers, which is basically farmers, small farmers holders that are linked by processors or large operators, we have done 34 billion to cover over 100,000 farmers. We also did youth investment scheme across the country, all these products actually across the country, for 1.6. It's a new product that is intended to invest in youth to have returns around Yahoo, banditry, and other insecurity and unemployment. We have done over 6,000, and it's a new product, so it will gain traction. Recently, too, we have introduced non-interest banking. The idea is to give those other people opportunity, those who don't do conventional loans because of the interest bearing, so that they will have financial inclusion around that. We have done over 600 million. It just started, of course, last week. You can see in our portal, it's highly advertised. We have done over 600 million to about 3,000 Nigerians. I hope to get traction very soon. But all these loans, in overall, they are over 800 billion. So you can see we have done a lot, and I believe that will help unlock the SME financing gap to a larger extent.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Query, for giving us that data and all of those statistics. But I think I'm going to build on what you have just shared to ask, why do you think that it just seems like despite everything that has been done, we're not making a dent on the access to finance challenge? Why do you, from your perspective, what do you think is responsible for that? I mean, all of this funding has been invested, but why do you think there's still a huge complaint around we cannot access money, we need money, we can't access money?
Okay, thank you. All about the world resources are limited. Incidentally, even the fiscal authority has resources limitation due to COVID. And most of these laws I have mentioned are actually coming from monetary authority, which is central bank. We all know that there's a huge gap in financing for SME. Conventional banks don't do it, and perhaps that is why my institution was set up to fill the gap around why conventional banks don't do it. They don't do it because it doesn't have commercial income. They will ask for a lot of documentation around collateral, around guarantee, around cash flow bank statements. So there is access, limited access by ordinary persons. So for us to close that gap, it means all the conventional banks have to key in. But they don't want to put the energy there because the income is not there. So this bank was set up by central bank to help close the gap. And this bank alone cannot close the gap because we are talking of a population of about 200 million Nigerians. We are talking of SME as the last statistics are so over 40 million. So essentially, you find out that the gap is impossible to close. For instance, if you take what we call direct credit facility, as I speak to you, I have 8 million Nigerians applying for this loan. And invariably, I have done only 670,000 Nigerians. And the number has not increased simply because my portal has been closed since March. We are told the CBN money, you cannot get the portal open, more people apply, then they cannot get there. There's lack of confidence in the scheme. It's better we close the portal and be able to see how we can close the gap. And I'm not sure whether we can close the gap because I can't see us doing that million because the resources are limited. So the funding aspect, I think people should be more creative around funding. Which potential business SME setup should not wait for government. They should think about alternative sources of funding. It might be internal, it might be external. But depending on the government, with the deteriorating fiscal income of the government,
right,
it might not go well. Not everybody will get. Depending on central bank funding, in which central bank balance sheet has been expanded significantly because of intervention rules to help trigger the economy for growth, the gaps cannot be closed. So we begin to look for private sector funding. We need to have a way, a policy around private sector, whereby the conditions to access the loans are a bit losing, not necessarily create high risk, but are a bit losing. Or even government can say, okay, private sector, give those loans, and then I can provide guarantee around repayment, something like that. But definitely government alone cannot take over the funding gap, cannot close the funding gap because resources are not.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Curry. Just to build on the initial data that you shared, I think my question would be, what are transparency processes that are being implemented so that the data being shared is not one that, you know, can be questioned in a way. So what I mean is, sometimes when you have conversations with MSMEs, you know, it's easy for people to say, oh, we don't even know how many people they disburse the monies to. Maybe they are their families, their friends, you know, and all of that. So on the one hand, it might be because the entrepreneur is pained because he or she didn't get the funding. So they say that. But just to allay people's concerns and people who might be thinking along these lines, do you want to speak to transparency measures that are being implemented by by NESG Microfinance Bank, for example, to ensure that this data we're putting out there is verifiable data? You know, maybe it was even collated by an external partner, like Ms. Abisoye mentioned at LSTF, so that people are not coming to say, oh, it's Mr. Kure's family and his entire generation that are getting all of the funds, you know? So is there anything like that at NESG?
Thank you. Thank you. It's quite an interesting question because I had people querying my data. Let me give you a specific example. I had national staff telling me that all those disbursements that are made, I need to bring evidence. So somehow we have to carry evidence to them. So that triggered our transparency level. I said, okay, let's publish all the names of people that collected this on our website. Initially, we want to put their full details, but because of security situation, we now say, okay, let us just put their names. So if you go to my website now, NMA website, our bank website, you'll be able to see a number of people that have taken COVID loans or that are referred to a career credit facility. Okay. You can see a number of people that have taken admits. You can see a number of people that have taken Acoboros and the farmers' products. You can also see the youth investment scheme. And for every disbursement we made, that person must have a unique identity, which is BVN. Without BVN, you cannot access our loan. And when we are making disbursement, we are not making it to a pool account. No. We are making it to individual account based on their BVN. So that in itself entrance transparency. And since this bank came in, we make sure our detailed accounts are ready for public consumption. So that the auditor account will tell you, auditors have gone through it, they review our books and record, and they will now issue our accounts to the public. So you see the numbers that I have mentioned there. And I don't want to believe auditors will put their hands in a document that is not transparent or it's not accountable. Because they themselves also be accountable. So it's a big question, but what I want to say, every individual that collected this loan, we have their records, we have their BVN.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Piri. Thank you. So I'm now going to move on to Mrs. Olajede. And Mrs. Olajede, there's so much has been, shared around access to funding for MSMEs, development financing, how the public sector and the private sector can work together, and all of that. So as someone who works, in the private sector with Access Bank, what would you say are Access Bank's key priorities in terms of MSME financing and development financing in Nigeria?
All right, thank you very much, Amaka. It's such a pleasure to be here and listening to my fellow panelists. I dare say that our reputation as a bank who is committed to supporting MSMEs goes before us. If you listen to some of the contribution from my panelists, especially from Ms. Tejua Bisoye. So before I speak specifically about our key priorities, I just want to highlight some statistics and some funding statistics, which even my fellow panelists have also highlighted in terms of what the gap is, the financing gap, as estimated by PwC on an annual basis. The fact that of all of the banking credit, less than 1% is available to MSMEs, the number of, the very limited number of MSMEs that have been able to benefit. And the fact that even with COVID, the GDP of the country declined, household income, also declined. And the reason being that MSMEs that contribute to these statistics still have the funding challenges. The pre-existing conditions deepened and made it, and the impact was felt, on the economy as a whole. So I'll say that for us at Assets Bank, within the context of this statistics that I've highlighted, our key area of priority continues to be for us to improve and mind the gap, the SME access to finance gap. We are committed to continually finding innovative solutions to unlock different sources of capital, whether be it from federal government or whether from state government, so that ultimately we can continually improve commerce, we can continually improve our prosperity. So our approach is very holistic. What we do is that we combine business services, which we consider to be a very critical element in business management, with our lending services to our customers. So that way they can continually make their contribution to the economy. We're very particularly interested in underserved segment like women, segments like the youth entrepreneurs, and of late, we're trying to really make or expand our footprint into the micro segment. So in order for all of this to work very well, we are always and still actively, working with a development financing organization so that we can improve our framework. One of the panelists talked about the fact that commercial banks always want to shy away from innovatively supporting MSMEs, and that's not the case with Access Bank. There's just no way we'll be able to do this successfully without partnership and without improving our understanding of the market. What you find in the market is that a lot of commercial banks shy away from or they pay lip service. I think more of paying lip service to servicing the SME sector because the numbers are not reflected, and the numbers are not reflected because there's a limited understanding of this very risky segment. So what we do is that we continually invest in our understanding of that market through partnerships that helps us to be able to make our risk acceptance criteria to be more flexible. We go into partnership to get credit guarantee programs that would allow us to be able to lend to MSMEs without asking for those traditional requirements like collateral. We are actively collaborating with state government. I mean, Mr. Just spoke about that, working with the state government to design programs. Even from the time that we started working with Lagos State government, we've had other state government also approach us, asking us to be able to replicate some of this this same program with those state government. But Ms. Bisoye was quite, pointed when she said that when she talked about some of the requirements and what the platforms that those state government needs to put in place to ensure that they don't mix these particular programs with politics. Otherwise, the ultimate objective will not be achieved. We've also recently signed a partnership, even at the federal government level, to also be able to disburse some social loans under the CHIP initiative. And of course, we are a channel of disbursement for the various intervention program. So, like I mentioned in summary, our key priorities remain to continually mind the gap, the access to finance gap for MSMEs.
Great. Thank you very much, Mrs. Olajide. I like the point you made around working with partners to understand the MSME sector, because I think that that's critical. And the truth is, if we're going to design intervention programs or funding programs that actually work, it's important that we understand how that sector operates. So you made a key point, an excellent point around that. And so based on that, I'll ask my next question. I was going to go round, but I will just ask, since I'm speaking with you now, bearing in mind the profit-making nature of commercial banks, right? And juxtaposing that with the current MSME funding gap, which you have mentioned, it's a key priority for Access Bank. What are some innovative approaches commercial banks can adopt to support MSMEs and can adopt in just bridging this gap? Especially because as a commercial bank, we're a profit institution, right? So that's clear. But then what are the innovative strategies that can be adopted? So you can speak from your experience, but this again is just something that we can even suggest to other commercial banks in the same space.
Okay, absolutely. So you're very right about our objective of maximizing returns to our shareholders. However, we also have values that recognizes values that also acknowledge that we operate within a community and we work very hard to maximize our contribution to the community, especially with the MSME segment, which is also a stakeholder in the community. So I'll speak about 5 initiatives that we have worked on and we're still working on as a commercial bank to be able to balance our profit objective as well as solving the access to finance challenge that is facing MSMEs. The first one was during the last civil unrest, the small business community suffered losses, which was a double whammy when you consider the fact that their cash flow had already been impacted by COVID. So Access Bank responded with an initiative to support these businesses that suffered losses, granting loans of up to 50 million at 0 interest rate. The initiative was titled the All for One initiative at the time. The number 2 initiative is that we've also created programs. At the time too, we created a program to support micro businesses that were also impacted. And one of such programs was our partnership with the Lagos State Employment Trust Fund, where we supported with a sum of close to about 500 million to be provided as grant to businesses that have suffered losses. Additionally, at the time, we were about the only bank that continued to lend to small businesses during the outbreak of the pandemic because we recognized the need for the businesses to continue to run. And we were able to do so because we were able to, we better understood the risk that the businesses were facing, the risk that we were also facing as a bank, and we put in place a framework that helped us to be able to minimize that. And like I mentioned earlier on as well, that we are working with federal government as well to be able to administer some social loans to micro businesses in a to just be able to administer those loans in a sustainable way at 0 interest rate. So all of these programs, they speak to some deliberate attempt on the part of the bank to be able to be relevant and be supportive to MSMEs. But for us to be able to sustain all of these programs where we're able to either give loans at a single digit or give loans at a 0 interest rate, continually create those platforms to support our MSMEs, where we are actively seeking for partnership opportunities that will give us funding at 0 interest rate, and we're really making very good progress in that instance. Such opportunities or such partnership would be able to allow us to lend at single digit interest to MSMEs. So this way, we'll continue to be able to balance our profit-making objectives as well as making sure that we help the MSMEs, businesses to also thrive.
Okay, so Mrs. Olejede, what I hear you say is innovative strategies that can be implemented to solve this would involve partnership and collaboration. I hear you emphasize that strongly. And I think that Mr. Kure also alluded to that point. So thank you for emphasizing that. And I hope that that's a key point and an agreement that we can take away from this conversation. So quickly, I'm going to jump back to Dr. Rada to ask my next question. So Dr. Rada, I know that when we discussed the first question, you mentioned the lack of coordination, which sort of impacts the ability to track impact around funding and, you know, job creation and all of that from SMEDAN's perspective. But you also touched on the National Council of MSMEs, which I thought, you know, is very exciting. And so my next question is, how is SMEDAN defining clear KPIs? So for example, with the National Council on MSMEs, where I know SMEDAN plays a major role, is SMEDAN defining clear KPIs that show how funds translate to growth and survival of MSMEs? And if those KPIs, do they exist to assess this impact?
Yeah, I think, thank you very much. I think based on the national policy on MSME, and I think our basic KFIs is that we ensure that there is more employment in the country, that is generation of more employment through the intervention, that is access to funding. Because the more the MSMEs are able to access the funding, the more they are able to create more jobs for the people of this country. And creating more jobs, it helps us to improve on the economy. And then largely the second thing is the business turnover. We are also likely to look at the business turnover as a result of the intervention they receive. Are they making profit? So what if they are making profit, it will help in their livelihood. So I think the major KFIs is the number of employments and then the turnover of the businesses. But you know, SMEDAN have been supporting the MSME Council in both the national and the state council. And then we are holding all the stakeholders to these key performance indicators by providing feedback and proper strategic solutions to all the problems encountered and be able to utilize the platform and other platforms that we have for our programs with the social media handles and the regular media channels to engage stakeholders. Because this is the only way we can do it, by getting the feedback from the stakeholders and then getting the required impact it has made through the need for, or through getting the number of employment, then the business turnover and how it has changed the livelihood of the MSMEs in our country.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Rada. So I'm just going to ask my next question that sort of builds on your current response. So in terms of, with regards to clear KPIs now, are there channels for ecosystem players and stakeholders, you know, such as enterprise support organizations, and to be able to engage with SMEDAN on data around KPIs and also give feedback? Because I think that one of the key points that has been emphasized in this, with all of the conversations we've had so far, is the need for collaboration and partnership. So there's that need for a feedback loop, you know, where players within the ecosystem can give feedback to SMEDAN. SMEDAN can implement. So there's that feedback loop in between, or between the public sector and the private sector. So based on that, are there platforms or channels that exist for ecosystem stakeholders or players to be able to engage with data around KPIs and share feedback with SMEDAN?
Is the question thrown to me?
Yes, yes, Dr. Rada, yes.
I think the act of—
Did you hear me?
Yes, the act that established the agency provided for that, because all agencies of government that are doing anything to do with MSMEs, especially funding and other development activities for MSMEs, they are supposed to give information to SMEDAN. SMEDAN being the apex organization in charge of MSMEs, they are supposed to get all those feedbacks from those agencies. And the act has allowed us to do that by the act of the National Assembly that established the agency. And we have written to most of these institutions and agencies since when I came in as the DG of this agency, even prior to my coming as the DG to the agency. But we have not been getting this kind of results. In fact, SMEDAN as an agency, we have created a credit information portal. The essence of the portal is for all the banks and other institutions that finance MSMEs to put on the requirement and the available funds they have for MSME so that it will be easily accessed by the MSMEs through that through that portal. But unfortunately, you have not been getting much response from these institutions. And that is why the credit information portal is not updated all the time. But we have written to the CBN so that the CBN can engage other financial institutions to key into that platform to make it easy for MSMEs to have information on all the available funds that are available in the ecosystem for their development and for them to access.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rada. When I listen to you talk about the challenge of getting feedback from other agencies, within the public space, it just makes me wonder, where do we begin to fix this? So in that regard,
I think if I want to come in, I think the only way we can get a better coordination on all these activities is through the MSME Council, which is chaired by the Vice President. I think if we put emphasis on that, then there should be a response from all the quarters where the response is supposed to come from.
Okay, thank you. But how about the private sector, though? How do we
the private sector in the council? There are a lot of representatives of the private sector in the council. I think the representative of the banks is there. I think the Access Bank is representing the banks in the council. And I think there are a lot of BMOs. This is National Small and Medium Development Enterprises Development, NASME and NASI. These are all MSMEs organizations. They are all represented in the council.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Rada. I'm going to move quickly because I think I'm running out of time. So I'm going to move over to Mr. Obaru. I'm speaking on impact or around impact. We've had some conversation around this. But Mr. Obaru, from your perspective and the work you do at BOI, how would you say BOI measures impact? And how does the institution communicate impact being made?
Okay, thank you, Amaka. Now, measurement, what is not measured does not get done. So if you need to check whatever you are doing, you need to measure it periodically and take a number to see how much progress you have made.
Right.
Now, for us to check impact, it involves us physically visiting our customers, having a conversation like this, using the electronic platform to meet with our customers and all our key partners. Okay, so we also do regular forums, customer forums, project visitation, etc. Now, how would you say that actually gives you impact? A business is like a baby. So when they come to discuss with you, that is discussion stage. You then provide funding, and then when you now visit, so you're like somebody going to Lagos Ibadan Road to meet an empty land, and you say, I want to put a factory here to produce tomatoes coming from Kano. And you then provide the funding, and then 2 years down the road, that bush becomes a factory, employing people. You see human activity. So your visit alone, you have some satisfaction that, I was here 2 years ago. Today, we transform the place to a community where people can earn their living and product and service are being shown out. So that is one way we measure our impact. The second way we do is to use this direct and indirect measurement of unemployment. And I said that earlier, there's a ratio of 1 to 4. For every job you create.
Hello, Mr. Obaru, can you still hear me?
I'm hearing you. I'm hearing you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
We can hear you, sir.
Can you hear me?
I think
okay.
From Amaka's end. We can hear you, sir. Please go on.
Okay, fine. Okay, fine. So we use the direct and indirect way of measuring impact. For every job you create, that job provides for 4 indirect people, because in Africa we depend so much. So every man has a job, he has a wife, he has children, they have cousins to take care of. So also use that direct and indirect as a way to measuring an impact in the market in terms of job created. Lastly, we did a hybrid of estimation using the value of loans that we disburse, because these facilities are given to companies and the companies will then create jobs. So we use the value of loan to estimate the impact we made in the system. Also, I'm sure you are aware that the BOI has weekly television programs on channels, on NTA twice a week, where we called BOI Impact. That is the name of the program on television, which is aired every week. And in that program, we showcase our customers that we've given money to, what they do, how they are doing it. And we also allow interviews where they share testimonies of what the bank has done, you know, from the idea stage to what they are doing currently. The essence of that program is to encourage everybody, all entrepreneurs across the country, to approach any of our 30 business offices across the federation, scattered across the federation, to seek support from the bank, because we're a national institution. So these are the ways we measure our impact as an institution.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Osa. So I really have to run and open up the floor for questions and answers now from the audience. But before I do that, I'm going to pose this question to LSCTF. So Ms. Abisoye, how would you say LSCTF is able to test and link data to impacts being created? So all of the data that LSCTF is collating and is sharing, how is LSCTF able to link that data to impacts created? Once we answer this, we'll move to the question and answers.
Thank you very much, Amaka. Like I said, we're very much using independent verification processes to get data in terms of the impact LSCTF is having in the ecosystem. But there's something Ms. Olejede said that I think is very critical to mention. And I think also Mr. Kure has mentioned from the bank, is that we need to recognize the different types of funding in the ecosystem. So for example, all over the world, there's 75 billion in philanthropic assets under management, but there's 3.1 trillion in commercial sector. We have to find, and the money is needed to the consumer, the MSMEs or the vulnerable groups that need this money. How do we create structures, like Mr. Olojede was saying, how do we get structures where we can blend finance, as Lagos State government is doing today with commercial banks? How do we create structures where we're doing social impact bonds, or we're creating structures, credit guarantees across, whether from public or funds that are in the bucket of philanthropic or buckets to the commercial? How do we mix it to a middle ground? Because at the end of the day, if it's too expensive, we're not going to be serving the vulnerable people. We're not going to be doing justice to that bucket. We must make sure that we get a middle ground. But again, get the data, connect data to impact, make sure that we can use it, make sure it's collectible data that we can use. Right. Like Mr. Osai is saying, what you don't measure, you cannot know how much work is being done. So, but before you even go out to fund, what are those numbers you're looking at? What are the things determining the parameters for you to fund these businesses? Is it the number of jobs created? Is it the affordability or ability to repay? Those are the critical things that you must create structures around, so that when you're funding, you are easily able to measure the direct impact.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ms. Abisoye. So quickly, I'm going to move on and open up the conversation to take feedback from our participants. I want to thank our panel speakers, for the insightful contributions and insightful information that has been shared. But before I take questions, I have questions that have been collated and sent to me. I'm going to yield the floor to Mr. Dennis, who is a thematic lead that leads the Access to Markets group within the MSME community of practice, to give his question, or rather take his question or give his feedback. Mr. Dennis.
Thank you very much, Amaka.
Welcome.
I also want to thank and appreciate the panel. It has been a wonderful experience. I'm sure we couldn't have asked for better contribution and knowledge sharing. Let me quickly try to say to Dr. Rada, I don't envy your position, especially given in the environment we find ourselves post-COVID. It's obvious that more and more demand is going to be made of SMEDAN. And as the days go by, these demands are going to move from just having the basics to specifics. And when I say specifics, I'm looking at the area of data, having regular data, you must agree with me, and I'm sure all of the panelists will know that with the emergence of COVID, sourcing of raw materials, for instance, has shifted from when China used to provide virtually every raw material that most of our manufacturers and MSMEs require. So there is an urgent need to know where we could source for alternative raw materials locally or within the West African sub-region. And so when we give out loan and then we are not able to determine what segments of the economy have received this loan, it also creates more burden for MSMEs to be able to determine, where do I go from here? Where can I find cheap, affordable, yet of good quality raw materials? And so some of these data needs to come consistently and more regularly than we used to have. Yes, just like you just mentioned, you have had the MSME Council have not met since the last quarter of last year or so. And that leaves some gap because information needs to flow faster than we used to have it. So data becomes critical. And for instance,
so Mr. Dennis, yes, I'm going to have to cut you short. Mr. Dennis, please wrap up, please. We don't have much time.
So I think what are we doing? What is Smedan going to do moving forward to ensure that we have more segmented data to help us aggregate what you are doing and then be able to have access to some of this information and to help business planning. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Dennis. Dr. Akimbola, I would now yield the floor to you. Dr. Akimbola is the thematic lead for the Policy and Regulations Group within the MSME Community of Practice. Dr. Akimbola, you have 1 minute. 1 minute.
Okay, thank you, Amaka. And I want to appreciate all panelists on the platform. My questions goes in many series, but I will just try to streamline some of those challenges that I see ahead. The challenge I see with respect to supervisory would have to do with the sustainability of the National Council of MSME. For example, the last time they met has been long, and it was said that the deputy governors in all the states are expected to head such council. There are a lot of conflicting rules with respect to that. However, when this administration is over, how is that going to be sustained? Also, I want to pose this challenge again to in the direction of the National Council for MSME with respect to data, because the data we rely on are majorly data that comes from the National Bureau of Statistics. And I think as a council, that council should also be saddled with the responsibility of providing accurate information with respect to disbursement, with respect to how SMEs are performing and their impact subsequently, so that when people are quoting statistics, they will not be saying MBS every time. I think MSME deserves their own data center for which information can be relied upon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Akimbola. Thank you. And I'm sorry that I'm having to cut people short, but we don't have time. We honestly don't have time. Yeah. But thank you very much. So, Dr. Rada, do you want to respond to this? I hear a lot of feedback around data and being able to, share data on a consistent basis. Do you want to respond to this question?
Yes, I think data is very important. And, we have been thinking about that long time ago, of having the accurate data of MSME. All what we have all these long years is the survey, and survey is just an estimate of the MSMEs in the country. But right now we have started this project in the year 2019, and we are up to date. We have what we call MSME database mass registration exercise that is going on. But because it requires a lot of money, we are doing it state by state at the moment. And we have gone far. So far, we have registered more than 4 million MSMEs with their accurate data on what they are doing, where they are located, how can they be located. And after doing everything, after the registration, you will print your own certificate and with unique numbers, Smedan unique number. And that gives us opportunity to have the accurate data of Nigerian MSMEs, where they are located, what are they producing, what kind of services are they offering. And that will help us as a government to formulate policies toward MSME development. It will help investors coming into the country. And then the MSME Council, there is no contradiction in the MSME Council. The National MSME Council is headed by the Vice President. And then the exact functions of the National MSMEs is carried to the state and being chaired by the state. The essence of doing that is to harmonize the activities of the state government with that of the federal government. And then the system, the policies, the objectives, and the operations are the same.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Rana. Thank you. So I'm quickly going to take questions from the audience. And I see a lot of questions targeted at Mr. Kure. So my first question, Mr. Kure, to you from the audience is from Ibrahim Bello. And Ibrahim Bello wants to know, why is approved facility different from bank selling price and 25% markup price when the loan is non-interest? Why is your vendor partnership price higher than normal selling price on the streets? Mr. Kure, do you want to respond to this? Mr. Kure, sir, are you on the call?
Sorry, I just joined now.
Okay.
I think I had your question. I was actually doing, can you summarize it? I was actually doing something.
Okay, so Ibrahim Bello is one of our participants on the call. And his question is, why is approved facility different from bank selling price and 25% markup price when the loan is non-interest?
Okay, thank you. If I understand your question very well, our loans are highly subsidized because it's actually part of central bank function for ginger the economy for economic growth and development. Our loans are actually at 5% currently due to COVID, and effectively 9% after the COVID era, which will expire around February next year. The issue of vendor you are referring actually is like you are referring to non-interest banking. Yes, the vendors are available. The vendor are supposed to source for goods and services to supply at a very competitive rate. In other words, the way it works like this: you as the beneficiary, you have the right to choose your vendor to the extent that you can call about 5 vendors and choose which one you supply based on the price you can afford. That is one. 2, based on the speed to provide the material and also the quality or specification. So vendors are not imposed on you technically. It's you that should choose the vendor. The idea is allow for competition and lower the price. And we have also had several meetings to our vendors that if you increase the pricing, you're also taking yourself out of the market. But you know, why the vendorship is introduced to allow people to do what they are supposed to do, not that business they are supposed to. Otherwise, simply, I will have taken the man and go and marry a woman, but they're not interested, especially coming from the northern area. The northerners who have 4 wives, whole are to take the money and go and marry more wives. But the idea is to supply you the goods or equipment so that the intended business you want to do, you target at it. And the objective of the scheme can be achieved. So I want to tell you that you have the right to declare whatever vendor gives you a high price and take the vendor that can give you a reasonable price. But we have warned the vendors, they will not discount equipment or goods for cash. They will not give you cash. That's non-interest bank is not around cash. It's about asset finance.
Okay, thank you. So Ibrahim, I hope that answers your question. Mr. Kure, I have another question for you, and this is from Abosede Sofuwa. And she says, can we get clarification on the non-interest TCF COVID-19 support for household through NESL? Secondly, after application, how do you know you are approved, or who do you contact to know the state of your application?
Okay. When you get approval, certainly you receive an email, SMS telling you that you have gotten approval. But as I always said, it's not automatic because you apply, you must get approved because the funding challenges are there. What we try to do is to ensure that for other products, not necessarily to ensure that there's geographical spread. Even in non-interest, we have to ensure there's geographical spread, especially around the areas that actually not interest banking. Not interest for both Muslim and Christian, but we know that Northeast, Northwest are more inclined to apply for the product. So we ensure that there is geographical spread because it's a subsidized rule in the spirit of transparent accountability. The product we do are called Muharaba and Ijara. Both of them are not cash, they are asset finance. The difference is why Muharaba is goods, they supply goods, and there's a markup on it. The markup is the interest. Ijara is leasing. So at the end of lease, you have the right to say, I want to take this equipment, I don't want to take. So that is just the difference. But bear in mind that when you get the approval, SMS will be sent. And the numbers, the demand for this loan cannot be matched by the resources available. So when you get the approval, you receive a text. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kuri. My next question for you is from Kunle Lagbunju. And Kunle says, why does NESL decline the loans that were already approved under Msme's loan scheme?
That is incorrect. Once a loan has been approved, nobody will do it. Not even me, because it's approved by the governor of CBN, Emmanuel Central Bank. So why those ones were declined? Because some of them stay in the system for nearly 2 to 3 years. And because of their stay in the system for nearly 2 to 3 years, there is no feedback. The dynamics have changed, the business model have changed, inflation have changed the structure of your business plan.
Okay.
And based on the plans of what we want to do, initially the funding report was 10 million. But because we allow greater number of Nigerians enjoying the facility, the funding baseline maximum amount was reduced to 3 million. So that means if you apply for 10 million, I give you 3 million. Obviously, the business model will not fit into your funding. You might not even repay the loan because we will have used the money for others. So the idea is that, okay, we decline those that do not meet our risk criteria and ask them to go and reapply. We're not saying we are not going to give you the loan, but you now have to go back and reapply and do a different business plan to fit into the maximum amount of threshold now, which is 3 million.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kuri. I hope that that answers your question. I have a rather long one here, but I would read it out, Mr. Kuri. It seems like a long complaint. David Omata says, in the most recent non-interest loan from NESL, 500K is assigned for each beneficiaries. However, the portal shows each beneficiary would pay back 625K. Also, the fund is not given directly, but the equipment in equivalence to the loan amount is bought by the vendors and given to each beneficiary. Many persons have laid series of complaints about this. First, the interest of 125K on the 500K loan is I think he's saying is too much, being that it is non-interest. And then secondly, vendors buying equipment that are not worth the 500K for the beneficiaries who will still pay back the 500K plus interest. What can be done about this? Mr. Kuri, sir.
I think you need to understand the concept of non-interest banking. What we are doing for non-interest is not centrally different from what we are doing for the conventional targeted credit facility. The non-interest bank has two models. We have TCF and AGMIS. Under each, we have Muharaba and Ijara. So it's still the same 5% because all of them require margin. No interest does not mean that you are not going to pay for cost of fund. No, you have to pay for the cost of fund. So if you feel our computation are wrong or certain things you don't understand, you can reach our office. You'll be more indicated and enlightened. But bear in mind that non-interest banking does not mean you are not paying for, and it's not free. There's a cost attached to it. And the cost is more or less like a margin on top of what. So that margin is like 5% too. The difference, as I've said, is that they are not giving you cash and say, pay me back cash. They are giving you goods or equipment and say, pay me back by way of cash. That is the fundamental difference. So you need to understand that there's a cost of fund for even the non-interest banking. And that cost of fund, we have done it in line with the same conventional TCM and AGMIS. So currently it's 5%. Bear that in mind. And if you have any doubt or complaints, you can write formally to NMB. We'll look at it and quickly resolve.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Kuri. I will quickly move on to Dr. Rada of Sweden. So with regards to the conversation we had around, or the information you shared around data and having a portal where people can upload information, I have Mrs. Gudmi Lawson, who leads one of the microfinance banks in Nigeria, on the call, and he's saying this is the first time she's hearing that. So the question is, what is SMEDAN doing around spreading this information? So putting communication out there so that even private sector players,
I think maybe that I think SMEDAN has done a lot in sensitizing all this, because before we came up with the portal, we had a stakeholders engagement in which all the Nigerian banks were invited, all the associations were invited, including the Association of the Microfinance Banks. They were all invited, and it was done in collaboration with DFID, and we set up the portal together. And then after doing that, we wrote a letter to all the Nigerian banks and institutions for financial institutions in the country, as well as the CBN. And then we have asked for the buy-in of the bankers committee through the CBN. I think we have done a lot of sensitization, and we have written a lot of letters to that regard. But I think as a way of rider, we will still write a reminder to all those other institutions as a way of reminder again to them.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Rada. I have a question for you from Folashade Adeniji. And she says, what's the fate of those that have applied for the SMEDAN loans since 2020? What are the criteria for the application of the loan?
SMEDAN does not provide any loan. The only thing that we have available at the moment is the matching fund with the Bank of Agriculture. We are doing it in collaboration with Bank of Agriculture. And we are picking only 3 states as a pilot states. And we have just started, and it's in the process at the moment. I think we picked Kaduna, Oyo State, and I can't remember the 3rd state as a pilot case. And we are still in the process of the loan and the disbursement, but it's not coming from us. What SMEDAN is just doing is providing a matching fund to Bank of Agriculture so that we can just put our own contribution towards accessing finance to the MSMEs.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Kure. And so over to you, BOI. So for BOI, the question I have is, how can we, this is from Anas Ahmed, how can we access the Northeast Rehabilitation Funds as the owner of an SME-based business in the Northeast?
Okay, thank you, Amaka. Ahmed, I don't know where you are in the Northeast, but we have a presence in Bauchi, and I can also leave my number with you if you needed to reach out to me. The fund is available, it's been assessed. I've given statistics of how much have been disbursed, and the total capacity, the total fund size is 2.5 billion, 2.4 billion. That's the money that the bank is placed in that fund to support the businesses in the Northeast. So far, we've disbursed about 600 million. So there's still a huge gap, and it's an opportunity for you to actually access that fund. Obligatory about 10 million naira is interest-free. Okay, we have our office in Bauchi. Okay, we also have an office in Jos. Even though Jos is not central, but it's closer to some of those northeastern states. So we have an office in Bauchi and also in Jos, the Plateau State capital. Okay, and of course, we are present in Abuja and Lagos. So maybe outside this thing, you can call me. I can give you all the details so that you can actually take advantage of the funding. The gap is there, 600 million, 2.4 billion. So there's a huge gap on drawn balance. And we're ready to support any business you are thinking of, either trading or services or manufacturing. We're ready to access that fund at interest zero.
Thank you.
Interest rate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Osal. I know that there are other questions, and I also have questions that we couldn't take, but I really need to begin to wrap the session now because our time is far gone. So thank you for all of the questions that have come in. If there are more questions that we didn't take, please let us know. The NESG team would collate the questions, and it can feed into the larger conversation at the summit next month. So I'm quickly going to go to our panelists to give their last words before I invite Dr. Akimbola to give the closing remarks, and then I invite Adenike to give both thanks. So, Dr. Rada, any last words?
Mine Mine is just to thank you for giving us opportunity to discuss this thing. And I think it's important for MSMEs to take advantage of all the things that were discussed at this gathering so that we'll put it to use for the economic prosperity of our country. And secondly, I also want to look at the conduct and the character of some of the MSMEs toward accessing financing. We have to change our attitude. We have to change our character. We have to be collecting funds for the purpose in which the funds are meant for, not diverting the funds for other purposes. And then we should leave the actual MSMEs that wanted to access those funding. But majority, you see people who are not into business, but crafting a lot of beautiful business plan and access funding, which is not meant for those businesses. And I think we need to also change our character and attitude.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Rada. Mr. Kure, final word.
Okay. Final word for me is to just add to what the director said. I urge all the SME community to ensure that they come forward to get the loan. Because if you don't come forward, people who are not the SME will come forward, they will apply and they will get it. So, and the impacts or multiplier effect that we're looking for will not be there. So, we are, like for the NMA, we have a portal. I encourage all SME community to come forward, apply for these loans. If you don't apply, other people that apply will get it. And at the end of it, you that needed it, you may not be able to have because there's already a funding gap. So, and I also urge people that get it to use the money for the intent purpose so that they can be able to repay. Because if you don't repay, there are consequences around that. And lastly, for our products, I will urge Nigerians to be careful around scammers. I know sometimes there are desperation around, I want to get an MLB loan. So we have a lot of scammers here and there. Wrong website, clone website, clone telephone numbers, and so on and so forth. So people need to be careful. Just really go to our portal, apply, our journey portal, apply, and hopefully you might get it. But if you want to go through middle person that will take commission or facilitating fee, you might be duped. At the end of it, while you be duped, too, you may not get the loan. So at the end of it, head or 10, you lose.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Curry. Thank you very much. Thank you. Mrs. Olajade, final words.
Okay, thank you very much. It's been a very, very interesting engagement. Even I have learned a lot from my co-panelists. I just have one more thing to say, and this is in the design and the implementation of the intervention programs. You know, I think some of us have talked about the fact that yes, there are a lot of funding that is available. Uptake at best, based on our own experience at Access Bank, it's less than 35% of the volume and the count of applications at any point in time. And what we find that is a challenge is that in the design, it does not take into consideration the fact that the MSME sector is very diverse, taking into consideration the composition of micro, small, and medium businesses with varying needs, looking at the legal status, the perceived riskiness, and also the design of some of the program also do not even take into consideration women, the challenges that women face in their ability to be able to contribute to the socio-economic development of the country. So gender dimensions that recognize these challenges must be mainstreamed and also must be built into the programs. So as a bank, we also want to continually partner with you know, government, with the regulators to continually you know, ensure that the supply of fund is in such supply and in a format that it's easy for the MSMEs to, you know, to be able to benefit from the programs. But we also want to ask that, because to a very large extent, the commercial banks bears 100% of the risks. Just like it's done in other climes, we also think that the federal government should also consider sharing risks and making the requirement to be very flexible to allow on lending, to the MSMEs. That would be what I would add on to my previous contribution at this time. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. So just a slight change. I know I had mentioned that I was going to call on Dr. Akimbola, but I have been prevailed upon by the powers that be. So I'm going to call on Mr. Maberu, who leads the Access to Finance group. And, they've done a lot of work around the access to funding problem in Nigeria, to just give closing remarks. Mr. Maberu, please, you have 1 minute, sir.
Well, thank you very much. We've heard from all speakers. We've heard about we have seen the intervention from federal government is also good, but it has been used for milestones. We want to work that will last the sands of time, and that is why we've always had to recommend the LSETF model. You've heard her when she spoke rather. Therefore, in terms of private-public collaboration, we will need in this space to cater for our own peculiarities, a funding model that is homegrown, that will be very, very sustainable. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Maberu. And on this note, I'm going to yield the floor to Mrs. Adenike Adeyemi, Executive Director at Trade Foundation and the facilitator for the NESG MSME Community of Practice, to give the closing, or rather the vote of thanks. You have the floor now.
Thank you very much. And I hope that I can have 3 minutes, since this is the last thing that will be heard. So thanks. I would first of all say thank you to Amaka for very excellent moderation of the conversation today. So thank you. Thank you very much to all our special guests and panelists, namely Dr. Diko Maru-Rada, the DG of SMIDAN, Mr. Peter, represented by Mr. Obaro of the Bank of Industry, Mr. Abubakar Abdullahi Kure, the Managing Director of Nersel Microfinance Bank, Mrs. Teju Abisoye, the Executive Director of the Lagos State Employment Trust Fund, and Mrs. Ayodele Olojede, the Group Head Emerging Business at Access Bank. I would also like to thank and appreciate Mrs. Wonola Adetayo, Director of the NESG, for our welcome address, and also our thematic leads, Mr. Maberu, Mrs. Hansen, Mr. Onwebu, and Dr. Akimbola. I think for me, the key summary of the conversations that we've had are really around 3 to 4 areas. First is clarity in terms of the purpose and the of the fund. So if we're very clear around, and usually we always give it around hazy things, creating jobs, creating businesses, but there must be a much more deliberate attempt and focus in terms of how we even design and even communicate the impact of the funds. So that's number one. We've gotten suggestions around how even having identity, so even our identity management system can help to ease even the credit review process for anyone, whether they're trying to access the funds from a microfinance institution, from a bank, or even from any of the government funds that are set up. And so even though that conversations even impact what we're talking about, digital identity. I think the second thing for me would be around the role of governance. We've had conversations around there's actually a structure in place at the federal and at the state level through the MSME councils to provide governance support and oversight over all matters around MSMEs, particularly around funds. And for us, I think the key recommendation would be how do we reactivate, re-energize, and also ensure that the council also sets up a process where there's a monthly reporting around this. I like the examples of the NBS data. And yes, we definitely should have some form of a process where on a monthly basis, given the depth and the spread of funds and the increasingly growing that we have, where we have some form of a process where we're reporting on that. A quick example for me is if I go to the United States Small Business Administration's website, I can always see, if I look at their funds report page, you can also always see on the monthly basis, the number of funds that have been, the size of the fund, the amount that has been disbursed, the applications, that have been received, what has been processed. And even on a high level perspective, that can start to set direction in terms of the funds, the process, and all of that. And it's important that that transparency and accountability is also there, not just in terms of the current funds, but also even attracting private sector donor funding, development funding, philanthropic funding, who really are just looking for ways to contribute funding support to micro, small, and medium enterprises, and not have to do that themselves, but finding funds that they can contribute to and support and give them the confidence, that the accountability and transparency required will be followed through on. We've also had suggestions around using diverse mix of funding models, whether mezzanine, finance, and different types of even the social impact funds, bonds that are available. So that also even speaks to larger kinds of funds that are available, but also different funding models that we can also explore, because there's a diverse demographic from age, from gender, from sector types, from business levels and business stages that need different types of funding models and funding support. And that also helps in terms of just looking at innovative design and the approaches to it. And so we thank you all, our speakers, for really your time and providing perspectives and insight on what is working and areas with which we can also look to make progress with. And one of the things that I wanted to really confirm is that a lot of the feedback and the recommendations here will be taken up by the community of practice and would also form input into the conversations at the October Nigerian Economic Summit Group, which actually has a session devoted to MSME and looking at ecosystems. So we'll have these conversations, but even beyond the MSME conversation at the summit is other conversations around even digital transformation, around even another pre-summit conversation that's going to talk about open government and how digital transformation can help to accelerate accountability and transparency across different government levels. If you're yet to register for the summit, we encourage you to please register. You'll be the link has been posted a couple of times, but would also be posted again. So please, we encourage everyone here to please register for the Nigerian Economic Summit. For everyone here who is not a member of the MSME community of practice, we really encourage you to, from capacity building, access to market, access to finance, policy and regulatory areas. We have a lot of conversations that we're having, and we need as many stakeholders that we can get to be part of this conversation. This is a community of practice for entrepreneurs, by the ecosystem, and for the ecosystem. So on behalf of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group and the MSME community of practice, we thank all our participants, we thank all our speakers, we thank the NESG team that has been supporting this on the at the background, and we wish you all a good afternoon and a productive rest of the week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Bye, everyone. Thank you for joining the conversation. Bye.
Yes. So thank you, everyone. Everyone is excused now. Thank you. Have a good afternoon, everyone, and bye. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.